Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Richard Fontaine, the president of the Center for New American Security. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you tonight for the celebration of John Nagl's new book upon its publication, Knife Fights, a memoir of modern war in theory and practice. Now, if you've come to CNAS events before, or if you've read our publications, then John's work is no doubt very well known to you. He was the second president of CNAS and has left very large shoes that I've been attempting to fill since then. And he now serves as the 9th headmaster of the Haverford School in Haverford, Pennsylvania, and he's a visiting professor at King's College in London. John's book I saw in proposal form quite a while ago when he was thinking about doing this, and I have to confess that in the back of my head, even just a few months ago, I thought, a book on the Middle East and Iraq and counterinsurgency and terrorism and all of this, how could this possibly be relevant for the day? But he has, shall we say, impeccable timing because the lessons that he's drawn in Knife Fights have really some direct applicability to all of the questions that our country is wrestling with today. The book draws on John's extraordinary accomplishments as one of America's finest warrior scholars. He was a 1988 graduate of West Point. He went on to Oxford, where his doctoral dissertation on counterinsurgency was later published as Learning to Eat Soup with a Knife. He served as an Army tank commander in the First Gulf War and returned to Iraq with the 1st Infantry Division after the 2003 invasion. He was tapped to work at the Pentagon for Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz and then by General David Petraeus, with whom he wrote the now legendary Counterinsurgency Field Manual. And in these years and in the later time in the world of think tanks and in the intellectual arena, he became really a key architect of the military's counterinsurgency doctrine. And then this was, of course, put to such dramatic use during the surge in Iraq. Knife Fights, as we will hear tonight, is John's account of just how difficult the approach was and the struggle was to embrace counterinsurgency doctrine within the U.S. military, within the Department of Defense bureaucracy, and within the national security apparatus, more broadly speaking. And to draw out some of these lessons and to also look at their applicability to today, we have joining John, Steve Inskeep, the host of National Public Radio's Morning Edition. Steve has reported on and written on an array of foreign and national security issues from locations as varied as Karachi, Cairo, Baghdad, and Tehran. He's the author of Instant City, Life and Death in Karachi, and he's well known for his unique way of drawing out deep meaning and fast-breaking news. Following their conversation, John will be signing copies of his book if he has not signed your copy already. But before he does, please allow me to turn the microphone over to Steve Inskeep and John Nagl. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to share this stage with John Nagl. It was great to hear about his wide and varied career. And I was just thinking about some of the aspects of it, John. You have been to prestigious universities and served in the U.S. Army, which makes you an expert in a variety of large institutions that have trouble changing. That's good.
And Steve, I now run a school.
Oh.
And if you think it's hard changing an army, try changing a school.
Tradition. John Nagl, as we heard, served in Iraq. Part of that 8-year struggle that ended in 2011 when all U.S. troops left Iraq. Thank God we'll never have to fight there again. I realize that's dark humor, but you go with the humor. To paraphrase a defense secretary, you fight a war with the humor you have. And that's what we have at the moment. John went on, as we hear, to serve as a headmaster of a school. It's interesting that he was an expert in counterinsurgency, and someone concluded that that was good preparation for watching after several hundred boys.
1,000 boys, and as anyone who's ever been a parent of a teenage boy knows, they are all one unsupervised hour away from absolute chaos. So
Does it take an hour? I want to do one other piece of business before we get down to the questions here, and I just want to mention that John Nagl, as we all do, has a mother. He went off to war more than once and had to, at some point, tell his mom that he was going, and she did not physically restrain him. And
She's not very big, Steve.
Waited for him to come home. We're going to find out because she is here. Judy, would you stand for just a moment, please? Thank you for what you've done. You write in this book that we are likely going to be for some time in an age of unsatisfying wars. What do you mean and why do you think that?
So the wars I've fought since Desert Storm, which was really the genesis of this book, of my military service, of my thinking about warfare. I came of age when the Cold War was still hot, when there was still a gap in Fulda, when the Soviet Union was still a threat. And it was while I was studying at Oxford the first time that the Berlin Wall came down and peace broke out all over the world. And then Saddam Hussein invaded Iraq, and maybe peace hadn't quite broken out. And I participated in Desert Storm, which may be the last of the great tank battles. And it was an unsettling, a fascinating, an invigorating experience to be young and to participate in that kind of war. But it also seemed to me, between the end of the Soviet Union and the very rapid demise of the fourth largest army in the world at the hands of the American military with some Allied help, it seemed to me to indicate a real watershed in the history of conflict. That is, no one in their right mind would take on the United States again in conventional frontal combat, given what they'd just seen. So I believed that future enemies of the United States would look at how the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong had taken us on, not at how the Iraqi army had so unsuccessfully attempted to challenge American military might. And so I started thinking then about asymmetric warfare, about enemies who would avoid America's strengths and attack our weaknesses, would use their cultural skills, their language knowledge, their tribal basis of society, improvised weapons to defeat the greatest military machine the world has ever seen. And the good news, I guess, is I was right, and the bad news is I was right. And the wars I fought after Desert Storm were those kinds of wars. And I think the world has seen the lesson very clearly that you can, in fact, attack America's most vulnerable point strategically, its national will to continue a fight by fighting asymmetric, prolonged, irregular wars. And so I believe that there's every indication that these wars will continue. They continue today. Steve has already mentioned the war in Iraq, but Peter Beinart has a good piece in the Atlantic Monthly on Afghanistan, the ongoing war in Afghanistan. And he hopes that the lessons of the mistakes we made at the end of the Iraq war are not repeated in Afghanistan, that we do not again, as is currently U.S. national policy, pull all American troops out of Afghanistan at the end of 2017 because the Taliban is waiting to come back, is waiting for that opportunity. And if we have, and I'll stop here, but if there is a guiding principle of American national security policy in the wake of September 11th, it is not to yield territory to terrorists in which they can plan, prepare for, and from which they can conduct operations against the United States and our allies. Right. We've failed that in Iraq right now, and we're fighting back against it. I very much hope that we don't make the same mistake in Afghanistan.
You said mistakes at the end of the Iraq war. You referred to withdrawing all U.S. troops. We could argue about whether it had to be done or did not have to be done, but you felt it should not have been done. Was that the only mistake at the end of the Iraq war?
That was the biggest mistake at the end of the Iraq war. So the single biggest mistake of American foreign policy in the wake of September 11th was the invasion of Iraq in March 2003. An unnecessary war fought, I don't believe, on contrived information. I think that the people putting the case together were scared, had felt that they had missed something on September 11th, and were